2, 3. We're testing.
I'm gonna get fixed.
Okay, well, we are here again. It is Sunday evening, October
14.
the 14th, 2001.
Right.
And we're here in the home of Grandma and Grandpa Wade and Vivian Hayes. And this is our second session to try to preserve what we can of the heritage and history of Sara Hayes Packard. These, of course, are her parents. Last time we were here, we talked about mostly Sara's roots, how you two got married, fell in love, what values you had, how you found the church, what the church was like in those early days, and the kinds of things that, what life was like back when, 75 years ago. And we just barely got started when Sara was born, and that's when we adjourned. So, again, this is a session that will be lots of cutting and pasting. So, even if we tell a whole story and you want to tell it the short version or whatever, we can just do it. It's not going to be played like we're taping it now. It's more like a news take where you talk for 2 hours and they take a minute.
Yeah.
But we're looking for, frankly, between you two and Dad, Bernie, that's going to be, at least half of the material.
Beg pardon, what?
Well, I think that half of the material will be either from you folks or my dad.
Okay.
And even though Rachel and Marshall and Ginger and Lola Cook and all the children and on and on and on, I can go as long as I want to. Army boys, there's no end to the people who would have something to say.
We can do a series.
Right. That really, I sort of feel like for a lot of reasons that this is, we're not under any pressure to expedite this process. Let's err on the side of completeness. Okay. But we're on the third bullet of the first page, which is the early childhood. What was Sara's early childhood like? Who did she play with? What did she like to do? What was a normal day like? Describe the 2 close calls. One of them was when she fell in a burning stump and got gangrene, and the other one is when she got her arm caught in a clothes roller. It's clear that the Lord preserved Sara's for a great work to do in this life. What other experiences would you like to share that occurred during this period in her life? So, share whatever you want.
Okay. Well, it came to my mind when she was 6 months old. Wade was in the service, and I was living alone with Sara at home in a little humble house that Wade had built, and so anyway, he thought that he was going to be shipped overseas right away and wanted me to come out to see him. And so Aunt Grace said she would keep Sara while I was gone. So I got on a train and went to visit Wade and stayed a week, I think. And when I came back...
In Camp Roberts, California.
Yeah, he was
south of San Francisco.
Right. And when I came home, well, I was so anxious to see my baby. And so Pud had her on the bed, and they were playing, and he was goosing her, and she was laughing and all. And so I walked in the door, my baby, and she looked at me, and she didn't know me. And so she kind of pulled away, and then she kind of got to the end of the bed, and she turned around, and she looked at me again. Well, he had her, she couldn't walk, but then she looked at me again, and she jumped, and like, I know you're Mama. And then I got her, and then she looked at me like, you left me. And she was mad, and that was the cutest thing at 6 months old, that she was glad to see me, but she felt like I needed a scolding. And she gave just through the look that she saw him. Then I won her back over, and she was hugging and kissing, sweet baby.
And sequel to that, whenever Mother came back, and then she decided I could live off post, I was assigned to stay there off season. And so we started looking for a apartment or a trailer or anything, and we found a trailer, a little cramped up trailer, and the price was right, but it was very inconvenient. It was cold weather and all of that. So Sara came, and I was so proud that she was our pride and joy. But we put her in that little playpen where she just barely had room to jump up and down. And it was so stuffy in there that she got a real bad cold and kept it for a long time. And every time you'd see her jumping up and down, you'd see the mucus moving out of her nose. And she kept that and snorted around for a long time.
But she danced.
But she danced while
I turned the music on, and she would dance to it.
And she didn't worry about that bad cold. But later on, then we moved into a little town there, got another better apartment, and so I remember, and others don't seem to associate that, but I remember that when she was 10 months old, she walked for her first time 22 steps. She had been trying a little bit. So she walked earlier than most kids or most of our children. But she did walk 22 steps, and I kind of remember that, and I still hold to that experience.
Our first place we stayed in the Army was in a Atascadero, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And that was our first trailer. And we had a little cart that was made out of wood, and you maybe have seen it, a picture of a little gray cart that Wade put kind of big wheels on it so that it could be managed pretty good. And we put her in there. She's about 10 months old and was heavy. And so we decided that I was in the trailer all day long, all the time, and I wanted to get out. So we said, we'll go to the town, which was how many miles to town?
Well, it wasn't a couple of miles, I think, from there to the heart of Tascadero.
At least a couple of miles, maybe more. It seemed a long time. But I dressed up with heels. And we put her in the little cart, and we walked into town on a gravel highway, no sidewalk, and pulling her in the little cart. And when we got there, we were going to go to a show. And when we got there, well, it says, you know, the show is on certain nights or every other week or something. Anyway, it wasn't open that night. So I said, what's to do? What we're going to do? Here we are in town. And it was a long walk, and we're tired, and it's getting nearly dark, and we've got to get back. And so we said, well, nothing to do. We'll just take our little cart and start walking all the way back in the hills. And so as we were walking on the way, and so tired I was, and it would get darker and darker, and we couldn't see the road good in front of us. And here came somebody in a car. Well, we could see them a long ways away because they had the lights on. And so we moved as close to the edge as we could get to the road. But whoever it was looked like they tried to hit us. And we had to jump into the ditch and escape. And we were really scared then. But we got out, and we did make time because we didn't want to be on that road very long. But we got home safely, and we never pulled that stunt again.
That didn't have a lot to do with Sara, but it was one of the experiences
Well, she was
of our
involved.
early life.
Oh, yeah.
When we got out of the Army, and she was a little older, and then she was always sweet and had her little curls, beautiful little girl. And it reminded me of little Sara today as we saw her with all those curls. and we'd go to the old chapel, and we didn't have conveniences, air conditioning. And in the wintertime, we would go to our meetings. Lo and behold, the old wood heater, you'd have to be right on it a foot away to get any warmth. But we went to our meetings in those pioneer days, didn't think a lot about it. We just said, and Aunt Dealey made this statement with respect to being saved, quote unquote. She said, if I were saved, I would not be out in this weather tonight attending meetings. And that typifies and illustrates how dedicated people were at that time, without any conveniences down at the chapel, to go in spite of all the hardships. We didn't think anything about it. We didn't realize, or we didn't classify it as a sacrifice. But Sara then was go along with us. We'd keep her wrapped up, and so on. Now, I want to tell one little thing I don't think has ever been told on tape about Sara. She was a little bit older. She was probably 6 or 7 years old. Mother, you correct me on this because I don't recall. We built this old house, and we had decided the way to be classy would to have a cyclone fence, and so we got a cyclone fence around it on credit, and had a nice cyclone gate. And we had a neighbor that moved from Port Arthur, brother and sister Fordyce. And so he'd come up and he'd debate and argue. He liked to discuss politics.
He took the congressional record and read it every day.
Amen. And so Vivian and Brother Fordyce were talking in a friendly sort of way, but arguing a little bit politically. And they would discuss the views and whatever. I don't remember exactly. But Sara would look at one and look at the other, little bitty kid as she was. Mm-hmm. She'd look at... She
hadn't started school yet.
And she looked at this one and that one, and it was a very intelligent statement she made at that early age. She said, when Brother Fordyce left, she said, Mother, said, did you know you and Brother Fordyce changed sides 3 times?
I wanted to tell one about when she was still little. She sucked her thumb, and and she'd curl her hair. She'd run her finger through her hair like this, And so we'd try to make her quit sucking her thumb and take your hand, don't mess up your curls and all. So she said, one time somebody said something, how you doing, Sara? She said, I suck on my finger and I curl on my hair. And so then one time Teeny came down, when he'd come, and all of Wade's brothers and sisters make on over because they didn't have any children of their own. All but Grover, he had children. The rest of them didn't have children, so they'd make on over ours. And but she would always turn away when Teeny would come, and she'd say, Teeny mean. And we'd say, no, give Teeny a hug. No, Teeny mean. And she'd turn away from him. So then Teeny bought a car. And so we were all excited because we didn't have a car. Wade was catching rides to work, and I'd be catching rides to town every now and then. But we couldn't afford a car. And so when Teeny got a car, well, Sara says, he came to see us to show us his car. And man, she just went threw her arms out, hugged Teeny, and he took her and she just put her arms around his neck, and she says, Teeny mean no more. Teeny got a car.
Him got a car. Teeny mean no more. Him got a car. Yeah. And I thought that was cute.
How old was she?
She around 2, about 2, barely talking. Well, and she talked pretty fluent. Started putting sentences together and talking at 2. She was saying words for a long time. Or something like that, but she started talking good at 2 years, and
But-
potty trained at 2 years.
Even at 9 and 10 months old, we used to carry around, though we concentrated either subconsciously or otherwise on trying to teach her a vocabulary of words, starting with simple words, even like a fly that flies. We'd point to that and say fly, and get her to mimic that word, and that way she built her a pretty good vocabulary. And then when she learned to put words together, she was early on she could express herself and did a good job. And we always classified that as getting a little jump start on schooling, which we think that started her. And then whenever she, in early age, started playing the piano excitedly and enthusiastically all the time, she never did refrain from performing, and we did it in a sweet spirit. And we would ask her, we'd have missionaries come or visitors come or grandparents come. We'd always have them listen to her play the piano, perform her talents. And she was always perfectly willing. I never remember of a time when she would whimper and say, I don't want to. So she was not timid or bashful. And the fact that she learned music and took lessons, we have read since that those that take music generally have a higher IQ and understanding of vocabulary and other things at an early age than do those who do not. So that was a distinct advantage that we didn't know at the time would contribute to her intellectual IQ and state of intelligence, shall we say.
When did she start playing the piano?
First grade, and she was always. I'd had this thing. I wanted her to be the best. When we'd have a recital, well, I wanted her to be the best, and we'd work until she was perfect on it. And she'd get up there, and her fingers would just fly across those keys, even as a first grader. And she would, I thought, was the star of the show. There's no one played better than she did, I didn't think. And I know I was more nervous during the recitals than anyone else. Probably a lot more nervous than she was.
Yeah.
Actually, I can go ahead and tell a story here about one recital. Miss Kimmy, she was her star pupil, and so whenever she wanted to show off what she could do with the other piano teachers, they had a recital in Beaumont at the Women's Center. And so each teacher could take one student and let them perform. So she had a little song that she had played. It's called Spinning Wheels. And then she had another one that she played called Rhapsody. And the Spinning Wheels she had when she was, say, in the third grade. And then she played Rhapsody in the fourth grade. And so she was going to play Rhapsody that night. And so a little girl that played before her played Spinning Wheels. And she played it da 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 like that, very slow, every note. Give plenty of time to think before you hit the note. And so she played it one note at a time. And so when Sara got up there to play, she just sat down to the piano and put her hands on the piano and started playing Spinning Wheels. And she was playing it in six notes at a time. Brum, 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 like that, and all the way through. And she sounded like Paderewski on it, and just a little simple tune, but she could play it like an artist. And I thought, oh, she's playing the same thing. But I don't think anybody else really recognized it. So then she thought, and I don't think she ever went back and played Rhapsody. I think she just came and sat down and didn't realize what she had done until after it was over. And she said, I said, you played spinning wheels? And she says, oh, you know, I said I wasn't even thinking about what I was playing, and she'd played it so many times. And I did want to tell another baby story. Much older than when I went out first to visit Wade when he was in boot camp, and I did take her, and then he said he wanted us both to come for a visit, and so I got on the train, went all the way to California on the train, and I had it all packed with her bottles and everything, and we were just in no berth or anything, just sleep in the seat. It's going, and it's a long way out there, and really, really rough. And she wanted me to hold her, and I'd hold her, and I'd bounce her, and she wanted to be entertained, and just say it was all day and all night, and probably another 36 hours, and of me holding her all the time, and I was very tired. So there was a big old Mexican that sat behind us, and she would flirt with him. You know how she was about Mexicans anyway, and so she would flirt with him, and he would boo at her, and so finally, well, he said, I'll hold her a while. So and she liked him, and she went to him, and I got some rest, you know. So as we kept traveling, well, he told me, you know, he's married and had 5 or 6 kids, and you know, like babies, and missed seeing his babies and this and that. And I ran out of milk, and I didn't have any bottles for her. And I said, oh, I don't know what I'm going to do without milk, because she will be so bad. And he said, well, you can get off here at the station when they stop and go in there and get some milk. So I said, okay. So he said, I'll hold the baby while you go. And I said, okay. So I took off, and I went into the station, and I had to wait because everybody's getting stuff, get in line, and I said, I need, you know, a quart of milk. And they said, well, we don't have milk here. There's a place right up there you can get milk. And so I took off, and I ran over there, and I thought, oh, it's so long to this place. It's taking so much time. I'm worried. So I went there quickly, got me milk. I don't know how much it was, but anyway. And then I turned around, and I came back. And then when I got on the train, you know how I am. I always turn the wrong way. And I got on the train, and I started going through the train. And I'd say, I don't see anybody I've seen before. I don't know these people. I don't know them. Maybe they're in the next car. And I went up to the next car. Got in, can't see anybody I know. You know, I don't know what I'm doing. So then I said, where did it? So they, no. There with some guy jumping her up and down. So
he was a blessing.
He was a blessing, and I did get her milk, and she was happy.
I bet you didn't do that again.
No, I would never do that again.
Well, you won't go in the cave again.
Then there was a story that I had a locket, and that I treasured, and so and she found it, and she wanted to play with it, and I said, no, you don't play with this, because this is mine, and it's precious, and I'm gonna keep it. Had Wade's picture on one side and my picture on the other, and so one day, well, I said, the locket is gone. where's the locket? Have you had it? And she said, no. And so anyway, she lied about it. And, or I'll say this, she told a story. And so I didn't have the word lie as a vocabulary word to use with her, because I thought she wouldn't understand if I said, you're not supposed to tell a lie. I said, don't tell a story, Sarah. You never tell a story. Do you understand me? Do not tell a story, ever. Heavenly Father doesn't like it if you tell a story, and Mama doesn't like it if you tell a story. So don't ever tell a story. And we had a little feed house there behind the house, and I said, and this is something I'm ashamed of, but I'm going to tell it. I said, I'm going to put you in the rat house, and until you learn not to ever tell a story, and you'll know. I'll always put you in the rat house if you tell a story. She was scared to death, and I put her in this. It was just in a little feed store thing, and I was just outside the door, but she was screaming, and I was standing there and saying, don't ever tell a story. And then I let her out right away, and so things went on, and I don't know if her ever tell me a lie. You know, after that did cure that. But she went to primary, and Aunt Dealey says, for the 24th now, Sarah, we want you to tell a story. And she was about 4 years old, not as soon as just a baby in primary. And she said, I can't tell a story. And Aunt Dealey told me this, and she said, well, Sarah, you know a lot. You know Bible stories. Your mama's told you stories. She says, I won't tell a story. I can't tell a story. And Aunt Dealey told me, she said she couldn't tell a story. And I said, oh, I know.
Put her in the rat
It
house.
was how she defined a story. I didn't tell anyone that I put her in the rat house. But she learned not to tell stories.
Didn't leave her for long.
And another little baby story was she would, she found out when I'd be working and all, I'd say, well, you go outside and play. And so I could get something done. And she would play with a little boy named Jimmy. Jimmy Arrington lived next door. And there's several little Arrington kids she played with. And so I said, I would say, go on out and play, and she'd play with them. They'd play in the dirt, in the road, because this Texas road was just a dirt road then, just sand. And they'd go play in the sand, in the road, because no cars hardly ever went by. And so she said she would, but she knew that when it rained, she wouldn't stay out in the rain. She could come in. So sometimes I would say, Sarah, now go out and play so Mama can get the work done. And she'd say, raining outside. And it wouldn't be raining, but she thought if she could make me believe it was raining, she wouldn't have to go outside and play. And then it was
Raining outside.
and when Marshall was born, she was 2. And so when they brought me home with Marshall, we got to Hop's store, and I saw, and I was laying in the back end of the car, and I wasn't expecting to see her. You know, we still was a mile away, 2 miles, 3 miles away from home. And so I kind of raised up, and I saw a man that I didn't notice who he was, and he had a little girl in a pretty blue dress. And I looked, I thought, that is the prettiest little girl I ever saw. Look at that pretty curly hair and those big blue eyes. And I said, that's my baby. But right at first, I didn't recognize, I wasn't expecting to see her. And I did. I thought I always had that was the most objective view that I had of her, and she truly was a beautiful baby. And,
Oh, yeah.
And it had, we fixed her hair with a little curly, cute curl comb up there, like a rooster thing, and the little curls all around. And had these great big blue eyes, and blue eyes. And that was an experience for me. But I was telling about after I got home, well, Marshall and Grace always helped me with the kids. And so she would keep Sara when I went to take Marshall for the 2-week checkup. And so when we drove up, coming home, well, then they told us that there'd been a bad accident and that Sara had got burned. And it seemed that Ellis, Wade's dad, had been clearing some land behind Maggie's house, which Maggie's house at that time was located on that little road that leads back to the Stanton house. And so he was clearing land, and he was burning out the stump holes. They had cut the trees down, and now then had set the pine trees on fire, the stumps, and it was burning down there in the pine tree was burning down in the roots. And it looked like that it was smooth ground. And so Aunt Grace took her over to see Maggie, and so she ran ahead. She saw Ellis, so she started running to him, and she ran across this stump hole with the ashes on top, and she just sank down into those hot ashes, and they burned her leg. She started screaming immediately, and of course they ran to her and pulled her out. But she had on little sandals, and it right across the bare skin where the skin showed, where there was no leather there, well, it burned her little feet to a crisp, especially on one leg. And so they took her. They didn't know what to do, and so they bathed it in cold water or did something, do the best they could, but she was crying. And so we took her to Dr. Gribble. He was a osteopath in Beaumont.
Inviter,
yeah. And so he took some kind of lotion, poured it on her leg. She was burnt from her knee down, but the main part of the burn, the severe part, was right on her feet. And so he didn't cut away the dead skin, but it was, and he didn't do anything, but he just poured this lotion on it and then wrapped it up in a bandage and sent us home and told me to pour this lotion on the bandage. Do not undo the bandage. And so we let it go, and he said, come back in so many days. Well, when we went back, well, I don't know, he still didn't take the bandage off, did he?
I don't remember, Mother. I knew that we wound up in...
But then she started having fever, and then we said, someone says, you need a better doctor, because something's going wrong. She's not doing well. And so we went in to Dr. Chun's office, and he really was an obstetrician, I think. Anyway, he was...
Dr. Chun was an MD, and he had an associate named Jacobson,
right,
who had just got out of the Army and had some experience with burns and penicillin.
We didn't know about penicillin.
So he addressed, told us that he could handle it, and he put her in the hospital there at...
Said she had gangrene. No, he didn't then. He said just a severe burn, but we maybe could handle it with penicillin. And we were in the hospital, and...
it got worse and worse.
Yeah, and they started, though, but every 3 to 6 hours, something like that, they would come and give her a shot that you couldn't take pills, and no one knew about penicillin. He's the only one that knew about penicillin, and so they would come and give her a shot.
And had intravenous right in here.
Right in her buttocks.
Groins here, right here.
And when the nurse would come, she'd be walking. When she heard that nurse coming down the hall, she could hear her clicking her heels. She would start screaming, "Oh, mean nurse, stick in my bottom. Oh, mean nurse, stick in my bottom," and just scream, And we'd have to just hold her down, and you couldn't hardly hold her down to get that shot. And it just tore that old nurse up, and she would, the nurse was kind of cuckoo, and she would say, then after a while, Dr. Jacobson said, bring her by the hospital, and his office. We'd check her out of the hospital, and he said, if she turns out all right, then you can go home. But said, we hope that it checks out all right. So anyway, we took her out of the hospital, went by the office, and he took the bandage off, and there was gangrene in her leg up close to her knee. And when we went in the hospital, it was gangrene in her foot. And so then when we went back to the hospital, it had come out under her knee. And he told us, he said, now, if when we're taking the bandage off, we hope that the gangrene is gone and that we won't have any more, because it's bad news if it's still there. So we just had to turn around and go back to the hospital. And he was like, it's going to have an amputation if it comes. He said, we give her more penicillin and watch it and see if the fever goes away. If the fever stays away, she didn't have any fever at that time. He said, if the fever comes back, well, that is the bad news. So
You lose her.
And then when they looked
I didn't realize the severity of it then. I didn't even know that the priesthood brethren were simultaneously meeting here at the old chapel and praying for us in a circle of prayer. And then President Smith, Glenn G. Smith, big, tall brother to the half-brother to George Albert Smith, the prophet. He came in and fresh on his mission, and he inquired, and they said, this sister, but President Smith, he said, I want to go up there. And they said, well, they won't let you in the hospital. He said, I'll get in. He felt the urgency of it. It was kind of bearing on his mind through the Spirit. And so he darted up there to the hospital. There she was, virtually dying. And so he asked me to anoint her. And he sealed anointing. And whenever he administered to her, she had fever. And whenever he took his hands off, as I remember, the fever was gone. And she started mending.
Yeah, she was broken. She broke out in a sweat. And
she was mending.
We knew that it was.
There was nothing in the world but a priesthood blessing that brought her from the death stage. And then many years later, that jumped ahead many years ago when she was a teenager, we went by on a vacation through Salt Lake City, visited the area, and we said, we'll just go to one of the wards right here in Temple Square, right down the road here. And we went into it, just picked out one. And Sara went in as a teenager to a Sunday school teacher. And then we've told this before, but lo and behold, this older man that was teaching the class, Sara asked him if she ever did know about administering to a little girl.
She found out who he was.
He was that Sunday school teacher. And she said, well, I'm that little girl. And you talk about rejoicing. I wasn't in there. But it was it made his day to even reminisce about the great experience he had. He had had lots of experiences and miracles that happened under the hands of his priesthood power.
He said that morning when he got up, and he was brand new on his mission here as mission president.
That's back
and
to the...
He said God came in his mind to go to Williamson. And he didn't know anything about Williamson hardly, but he just on his mind real hard, go to Williamson. So he went.
Followed the Spirit.
And when he got here, he found these brethren praying for her. So he says, now I know why I came. And then he went. And they told me, he says, your pastor's here. And I said, well,
we don't have a pastor.
I said, we don't have a pastor. And she said, yeah, but he's here. Well, I said, our branch president has already been here this morning. Yeah, but this man says he is your pastor. And I said, well, let him in then. And so then he introduced himself to us. And then we proceeded with the pastor.
This is so touching. In a way, I don't like to talk about it because it's like anything
sacred.
that's been so. Well, I'm talking about the fear that I had, or didn't have, or didn't know, of the severity of how close we came to losing her, and to know that the Lord was kind and good and blessed us in a natural but a miraculous way. You could say it both. But it hurts me to talk about it, and it hurts me to think about it, because I realize the reality of it and how severe that was. Gangrene, in those days as it is today, that's bad news. That's talking about amputation or
death. There was a boy in my class at school when I was senior that got a football injury and with gangrene and died.
That's the
died
way.
before the year was out.
So when you have gangrene, you really need a priesthood blessing in every case, because you can't bounce back. Antibiotics weren't just brand new on penicillin, and they didn't know a lot about it. Anyway, that's the story of...
One more little story that goes with the hospital visit was this nurse, night nurse, that had to administer the penicillin shot. Well, she had been told also that if the fever comes back, notify them because it's very serious, and that's a signal that it be terminal.
She was taking check on temperature all the time.
So in those days, the nurses wore heavily starched white uniforms, and they were not a wrinkle in them, and they would go swish, swish, when you walk. And so this nurse would come, and and we noticed that in the middle of the night she'd come and look at that thermometer, and then she'd scratch her uniform, shh, 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 and she'd say, it's all right, all right, all right. It's all right, all right, all right. And
she was a basket case.
She would go through a little ritual over that thermometer. The thermometer's in the glass, see? And she would do that. And so we said, well, she's slipping in here and doing a little voodoo on that thermometer, so let's move the thermometer and see what she does. So we moved it, and she found it. It was in the window. We put it in the window instead of on the table. And she still would go to it and say, it's all right, all right, all right. It's all right, all right, all right. So
we mimicked her and got a little chuckle out of that.
And it came to be a saying with us whenever we wanted to
be all right.
Something, yeah. It would just say, well, if we were letting people know we wasn't too bright, well, we'd say, oh, it's all right, all right, all right.
Okay, let's jump to the time whenever she got her arm in the washing machine. In the old days, they had washing machines with two rubber rollers, and they were naturally mechanically tight against each other, so when you push, and it was powerful pull, geared up to pull through. You've probably seen them. And you'd go through there, and it'd squeeze the clothes until it got most of the water out.
as dry as a
Well,
dryer.
and Sara was inquisitive, and she liked to piddle.
Like
and
Priscilla.
Play grown-ups, and all kids are. It's not abnormal for her to do that. She'd take them and put them up there, but poor little hand got caught in there. And it pulled her up there, and not only got her up to here, but started rolling this flesh away from her arm. Was it left arm? What anyway, I think it was left arm. It rolled that flesh. And there again, after she got well of all this other, then she had that great tragic.
That was the day I took the bandage off of her foot. Well,
and
she was out there when I was washing. We had a little wash shed, and I was washing. And she got her, and I went in to see about Marshall. And
that would have made her about 4 or 5 years old?
No, she was 2.
Oh.
Uh-huh. And she was
She's
2.
3, Mother, I believe.
Well, Marshall was born.
Okay, well,
and,
let's go back then.
So she was 2 years older than
Marshall. She born in June of 43.
And he was born in September.
45, September 45.
So
she was a little older than 2, I think.
And I went in to check on Marshall, and
came back.
She was going to do the washing for me, you know.
And
that's
then
how she got it.
then the priesthood blessed our lives again with that all torn up flesh, and we were just devastated, of course, and we didn't think we were having an unusual amount of adversities by nature of the fact that it had so many things happen to us, but we just took it in a natural frame of mind. However, I went down to the church, and Brother Jesse Kirkpatrick, he was from Baytown. They call it Goose Creek at the time. He was a dentist over there, but he was he was district leader or district Sunday school leader in the early days before we were a state. And he was on our side and kind of presided over us in a way. And we got in that little Bishop Branch President's room, and he was voice and blessing and ministering to her. He used the words, "I'll never forget." He was very adamant about it, but humble. "I bless you to a complete recovery," and he said it loud, without fear of contradiction or question. And sure enough, she began to mend and heal and got well and whole again from that great tragedy. So that's 2 back, pretty close together in the early stages.
That ground enough flesh off of her arm here that you could see the artery.
Oh, yeah.
And see it pumping.
Oh, and it just...
And they thought they were going to have to do a skin graft.
Yeah. But anyway, that constitutes...
Priesthood blessing saved her arm that way.
That constitutes those great tragedies, we call it tragedies, almost near tragedies, that happened to our little girl. But all through it all, as I think of her early years, I'm talking about from 1 year on up, or day 1 to 4 or 5 years old, she was a real spirit, and it had a happy countenance, and she looked it. Her countenance was pure, as are most kids, but she had a real bright countenance, intelligent countenance, but full of positive attitude, smiling, and all to the day of her death, she almost smiled. She's never one that, like Bernie never does it. He always smiles. And I was not raised that way. She didn't inherit that from me because I don't smile that way. And Grandma smiles more, but she brought it with her from pre-existence. She was a happy countenance smiler in young and tender years, all through her 13 children.
Well, when she was born, you know, Grover was younger than Wade, and he had the first baby, and it was a boy. And so then we were going to have the next baby, and Wade thought, well, you know, he wanted a boy. And well, Grover's first baby was a boy, but it was killed in an accident. So then he had another baby, a girl, before we ever had one. And so he thought, well, I'll have the first boy that lives. Wade thought, I will. And he wanted a boy really bad. And wasn't thinking that we did have boy names and all, but wasn't thinking about a girl. And so when she came a girl, and they brought her to me, I felt kind of sorry for her because I thought, she's a poor little girl. Her daddy wanted a boy so bad, and I was trying to feel a little bit sorry for her. And the way she looked as she took my breast was like, who cares? I'm glad I'm who I am. You know, I said that little independent girl doesn't care if somebody wanted a boy. She's glad she's here, and she's glad she's herself.
Well,
And I felt that way on her first, and she was always that way, is glad that I'm who I am.
I have to kind of qualify a little bit about her being a girl. Sure, I wanted a boy, but I was not head set on it. You know, I reconciled quickly to what the Lord wanted us to have, and I felt no depressed feeling at all about it. Just glad to have a normal child. The only thing that was a little bit of a disappointment to me, and I hate to tell this but in a way, but I'm not embarrassed about it, is she had such a little bitty pug nose that I thought she was robbed of a good nose. But it finally got out and through the years. But she had virtually no nose, and sticking a couple of holes in her head. But she soon outgrew that, and was a beautiful tiny little girl with beautiful curls. So I have to tell that on myself. But I qualify the other. I was not saddened by the fact that here the Lord sent me a girl. And Uncle Cal pulled I've told this before, he was an elderly man like we are elderly now. And he said, well, Wade, says you're still boss in your home because you have a little girl, meaning, of course, obviously, that the boys could grow up to be dictatorial sometimes and kind of usurp authority. But she wouldn't because she's a girl. So that's our story on that part.
Yeah, well, my things have changed. Nowadays, if it's a girl, they say Dad loses control.
Yeah.
So they can't keep from giving the girls anything they want. It's a little rougher on the boys.
That's our story up to that point, and I don't know.
Well, this is a good point to change tapes because we've got about 6 minutes left on the tape. One other thing I would ask on this part, do y'all remember who her friends were when she was a little kid?
Molly Hetzel was the same age as she was. In those days, at 3 years old, I let her walk across this field, which was not grown up at that time. It was just grass. And she would walk across that field and go and cross the highway and go see Molly. And then Molly would come to see her sometimes, and they played out there in the field. And just, and she and Molly were good friends all through high school. They were all grammar school and everything going on up, and all through the teenage years until I think when she went away to college. When she went away to college, well then Molly drifted away from the church.
However, in those days, you didn't have a lot to select from. There was not a lot of kids her age. So Molly happened to be a natural because of the
same age
factor.
And also the Arrington kids that were next door during her early years, they were her close friends and played together in the dirt and whatever all the time. But they moved away to Salt Lake City. All the Arringtons did. There was 2 Arrington families there, and Wallace was mother was an Arrington. So anyway, so all of those little children that lived next door to her were gone, and the one that she played with as a young child, and Musette also was her age. As she and Musette
didn't live close enough together.
They weren't close. Seemed like Musette was closer to Molly. They had a triangle there, and sometimes there would be friction between them because Molly was Musette's best friend, and she was also Sarah's best friend. And sometimes they would gang up on Sara, and that's when I taught her to keep smiling. No matter what, you keep smiling and don't let anybody know that they're getting away with it. But Musette
And
turned
she
out,
obeyed that counsel.
and she
was obedient to that.
She would smile, and I told her that same way about boyfriends. And you have a boyfriend, and if he does something that you don't like, and if you have a breakup or whatever, you don't cry and you don't let anybody know that. You just keep smiling, and that way you break his heart. I always told her that when you see a guy's losing interest in you, well, quit him first, because somebody's going to get her heart broke, so it might as well be him, and not you.
That's
So, anyway.
cause and effect.
But through the years in junior high, and she and Musette and Molly and Sybil was in on a bunch that we worked, but Sybil and Sara weren't close as little children. Sara was a year older, I think, and but as they became teenagers, well, I used to give dancing classes that bring in the youth, and started when I think she was about 12 years old, and Musette and Molly and Sara and Sybil and the Wright girl, I believe her name was Charisse or something like that, and they were all the same age.
Mother, you to tell us the last 6 minutes and nearly up, but how early on she would take piano lessons, and how you drilled and drilled and drilled with your foot on the piano bench, and you were so serious, metronome wise, you'd count the points and tell her, and you really did do what little as you knew about music.
I didn't know. I could not play anything myself, but I could count time, and I could read notes, and
Up to a point.
yeah, I couldn't play notes that I was reading, but I knew by what she knew that I knew this was supposed to be an F and an A, and so on. And I sat with her for an hour every morning from the time she was
Now,
first.
you heard the word hour.
It was
She drilled and drilled and re-drilled that practice technique.
every
Grandma
hour.
did that because supposedly
Well,
she wanted to
that was our
excel.
That was our one thing, our time together, and I also I have to confess that I always wished I knew how to play piano, and so I said that I admired people that could, and so we had little Drusilla Bobo down here that played. She was the star pupil of Miss Kimmy when she was a teenager, when Sara was 6, and I'd always tell her, now you want to learn to play like Drusilla, and she could play. She played Polonaise, like an artist, and so she tried to play like Drusilla, and her fingers were nimble, and she could go right over it. Whenever she knew her song, well, she could play it like an artist. She didn't play like someone struggling. But I would labored with her every day, and I'd say you have to play it perfect 5 times. And So if she stumbled, that doesn't count. You do it again. Try it again. It has to be perfect all the way through. And so I know that was a lot of pressure. And one time I went to her, I thought I'm hard on her because I want it so bad. Maybe I'm the one that wants it. Maybe she doesn't really want to.